Dear cynics and romantics, my name is Monice, and you are listening to the Romantic Cynic podcast. On this episode, I wanted to share with you my experience on how time healed me after my divorce. It's been a few years since my divorce was finalized, and I wanted to share my experience with you and give a little bit of insight on how sometimes time doesn't always necessarily heal you because maybe there are things from that relationship that maybe you're obsessing about. So I hope you join me on today's episode where we might mix in some laughter, maybe some tears, romance, and of course, some cynicism. Welcome to episode 30. Recently, I had an experience where I had mentioned my ex-husband, and it took me a moment to realize that I actually haven't mentioned him or made a comment about him to my partner or my family or my friends in quite a while. I would say at least maybe a couple months. The only time I really mention him now is during my podcast episodes when I'm recording and sharing my life experiences with you. And I can't tell you how good it felt. It felt very liberating. It felt very much like freedom of really having been able to remove myself from that situation. And I just thought in that moment, wow, this is the moment I had been waiting for quite a while. Not that I haven't been working towards it, and not that I've been obsessing over, like, when am I going to stop mentioning my ex-husband? So if this is the first time you are listening to my podcast, just a brief background. My divorce from my ex-husband was finalized in December of 2020. I had been with him for 14 years and we had been married for a few years. It took him a long time to figure out if he wanted to marry me, and I will cover that in a different episode where men don't really figure out, they just kind of settle. And for him, he settled for me because he didn't have any other options. And not to mention, I was on the verge of leaving anyway, or I did leave. But it had been my most this experience recently where I realized I hadn't mentioned him for a while just felt really good. And that's what my podcast is, this episode is about, is just the fact that time really does, I hate saying this quote because it's so cliche, but time does heal all wounds. And the thing is, even though time does heal wounds, I think sometimes depending upon what we had experienced in the previous relationship, we might be holding on to a few things, some unresolved issues, or maybe issues that we just quite can't let go for a variety of different reasons. It could have been a very traumatic experience. I know a big one is usually abuse, which I haven't really talked about in any of my episodes because I feel like that is something that I really have to delve into a lot of research to be a little bit more informative of what type of abuse, the levels of abuse are out there. So it's not a topic I have quite taken on yet, but at some point I will delve into that because I feel like there is a lot of different types of abuse in relationships, not just from, coming from the man, but it also comes from the woman as well. But back to time really does heal. And so it was very nice. My partner mentions like, yeah, that's been a while since I've heard you mention his name. And again, it was such a good feeling. And this actually will go back a little bit. I'm going to give you a little bit of a brief history. This is an experience. This is a conversation I had with a coworker a really long time ago. I'd say probably around the time I started dating my ex-husband, and it wasn't in context with him, but I just remember this person had shared. It's called, like, you want to get to a point in a breakup, after a breakup, where the person that you were in a relationship that caused you so much pain and maybe so much grief, you want them out in the cornfield where you never think about them. That is just kind of a hyperbole for real life. So I believe that that love and hate are so closely associated with each other because they're on the far ends of the spectrum, but they're very linked towards one another, because that means you still have some type of feelings. If you feel hate towards your ex-partner or maybe towards your current partner, at some point you probably did love them, because typically hate doesn't really turn into hate unless you had loved them. And I'm just talking about the context of being in a romantic relationship. I'm not talking about things outside of a romantic relationship, just this in particular, because they're so associated with one another. They're very, again, they're on the opposite sides of the spectrum. If you get to a point where they're in the cornfield, that's a great place for you to be. And so I will explain what the cornfield is. So what the cornfield is, you kind of, it's just out there growing, soaking up the sun. It's just growing and you don't have to worry about it. It's just out there. You don't have feelings for it. There's nothing you feel towards this cornfield at all. There's no emotional tie to it. You are not driven by whatever it does outside of, in this field. You aren't. And I hope that kind of makes sense, but that's where you want to have your ex-partner is, hey, they're out in the cornfield. I'm not worried about them because I don't care about them. There's no love. There's no hate. You feel literally nothing. And when you are able to get to that point, it is power to you as a person, because you were able to get past such a traumatic or heartbreaking experience. And if you've gotten there, congratulations. That is a very freeing place to be. It's a point where you really have to recognize yourself and in your own growth as a person, because you're able to have that person out in the cornfield and never have to worry about them. Now, there are times where healing might take a long time, or maybe there's a lot of time that's passed. You're just not quite healed to the point because of, past trauma of what you may have experienced in that relationship. And so some of the things that could prevent you from healing is remaining fixated on something. For example, maybe you have body issues because of that relationship. Now, I know for me, I had a lot of body issues from that relationship because of the things that he would say about my appearance. And it took me a long time to heal myself from that, but sometimes it could be so dire and so severe of criticisms from an ex-partner, it might take you a really long time to heal from those things. Another thing that can prevent you from healing over time is maybe you refusing to let go of maybe some type of betrayal, in a relationship. So you hold a grudge. If you are known to kind of hold grudges, it healing from a relationship, especially with, hoping that time will heal. If you have that personality type where there might have been such a huge betrayal in that relationship, and you just hold a grudge against that person, it's going to prevent you from healing over time. And the best way, you know, easier said than done, the best way to heal from betrayal and heal by not holding a grudge is forgiveness. That might sound like something that you can never do, is forgive that person. But if you're able to find a way to forgive them through time, that will help you. Even if you have to say it in a not meaningful way, maybe you don't mean it at all, but just saying, I forgive this person, because even if deep down you still have this utter resentment and you're just holding this grudge against this person, if you write it down and say it, hopefully through time, it will become a matter of fact for you, and maybe you will forgive that person. Another thing that would prevent you from healing over time is maybe denial that something has happened. Maybe you're denying that the relationship really ended, depending upon if the person has broken up with you. Denial is a tough thing to get through, because you get to that point where you have to accept, or you hope, you would hope that you're able to accept what has been going on. But being in denial of something that may have happened in the relationship, that will definitely prevent you from healing. Your time will definitely not help the healing process. Another thing too is not forgiving yourself or the person who was accountable for the wound or trauma. So this one really goes back to holding a grudge. I know for me, I had to have some type of accountability in that relationship, because, there were two people in that relationship, and he wasn't the sole cause of all of our problems. It's so easy to blame another person for the relationship, but we forget as people sometimes to be accountable for what we did, what we caused in that relationship. And I know for myself, I didn't have, there were some moments I'm definitely not proud of being in that relationship. However, I am able to recognize the faults that I had in that relationship. And I can't blame him 100% for all of our issues. I have to blame some of the issues on me. And being accountable in anything you do is such an important characteristic that we can all develop over time, is just by saying, I am accountable and this is the reason why. And using I instead of you or they will help you become accountable for your own actions in that relationship. Now, it could be anything small, in terms of maybe being accountable for some of the things that you may have caused in that relationship. Not everyone is perfect, and I think recognizing our own self flaws is a big step in being accountable in that relationship. Another thing that would prevent you from healing, especially through time, is not having a solid support system. I think it's very important. I know for me at the beginning, I had a very, very strong emotional support system. I have really good friends. I have amazing family that stood by me and maybe not held my hand physically, but they were there for me. They held my hand from a metaphorical position. I was able to share my experiences and really just bawl my eyes out when I needed that time. I had a shoulder to cry, and I had someone that I have people that were able to comfort me and were able to share their own experiences of a breakup or divorce. And that is really important to be able to have that. But you as the person, and I had to realize this about myself, we have to be willing to be vulnerable with these people and have that trust. And hopefully you have a good support system. Hopefully you have at least one person that you would 100% trust, that you're able to go to and be able to share your experiences with them. You know, being able to have some type of outlet helps the healing process. Then we're not so internalizing everything that we had gone through in that relationship. Other things are, resorting to maybe unhealthy or coping mechanisms. So, for example, I know I fortunately for me, I didn't have any unhealthy coping mechanisms. So, an unhealthy coping mechanism for some people is going out and maybe finding physical comfort from strangers. Maybe you've experienced where you just, you go out to a bar and you just want to be comforted by someone physically, but there's no emotional ties to that. That coping mechanism isn't necessarily healthy, especially from a physical sense, because the last thing you want to do is get something that you might not be able to take medication for example. Other things that could prevent you is maybe relying on alcohol or taking drugs to numb your pain. I think sometimes, and I can speak for myself, where there was moments I did drink just because I wanted to forget. It was more about forgetting versus numbing the pain so much. I just didn't want to think about that. But I also think that you as a person have to get to a point where, again, accountability. You want to be healthy when you are trying to heal from a breakup. And especially, time does take a while. Like for me, it took a couple years. It took 2 years for me to heal. And being able to now look back and say, wow, that was a really long journey I had. Embrace that. Embrace being able to make changes. Embrace being able to find things that you enjoy doing from a healthy standpoint. I know a big one for me that helped me heal my process, helped me heal from my divorce. A big one is starting this podcast. Me coming out on these episodes and recording week after week and sharing my experiences is a way for me to helped me heal after my divorce. And I'm at a point in my journey where I feel as if I don't have to share so much of my divorce. This was part of my entire healing process, but I want to continue this, recording these episodes for you week after week, still share my experiences with you because I want you to know that you are not alone. I think a big part of that sometimes is we think that we are alone in what we've experienced. We think that we're alone in our pain and in our misery. And in fact, there's so many of us out here that have experienced what you've experienced, and maybe to the extreme sometimes. I've had some really horrible experiences in my life, but I am mentally strong where I was able to rise up above those things and be able to sit here and talk to you about some of my experiences. I'm a very positive person, and I think a big part of my healing happens to be how positive I am as a person. So finding the positivity in everything, little thing you do is going to help with your healing process. And a big one is like forgiving yourself and being able to let go. So I hope you found some insight on this episode of Time Heals. And of course, with every episode, I want to end with a quote. And this one is from Phoenix Mode. And she writes, "Trust the process. One day you'll look back upon this time which you thought you wouldn't be able to get through and feel proud of yourself. Proud for having walked through the flames safely, if not unscathed. Believe." Thank you for listening. And as always, yours truly, the Romantic Cynic.